Major support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Colonial Life, providing benefits to employees to help them protect their family, their finances, and their futures. High Point University, the premier life skills university, focused on preparing students for the world as it is going to be. HPU's call to action is choose to be extraordinary. And Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Well, the new year begins, as always. The new decade begins amid a barrage of resolutions and promises for a better future, right? Hello and welcome again to the most widely watched and longest running source for Carolina business, policy, and public affairs. I am Chris William. But what does the promise hold for the Carolinas in 2020 and the decade, especially for those on both sides of the job hunt? In a moment, the executive director of South Carolina's Department of Employment and Workforce, Dan Ellzey, but we'll kick off this dialogue in just a moment. Stay with us.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Martin Marietta, a leading provider of natural resource-based building materials, providing the foundation upon which our communities improve and grow. Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, an independent licensee of the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association. Visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Barings, a leading global asset management firm dedicated to meeting the evolving investment and capital needs of its clients. Learn more at barings.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Aaron Nelson of the Chamber for a Greater Chapel Hill Carrboro, Dr. Joseph C. von Nessen of the Moore School of Business, University of South Carolina, and special guest Dan Ellzey, Executive Director of the South Carolina Department of Employment and Workforce.
Hello, welcome to our program. Is it too late to say Happy New Year? Can we?
No, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
It's not inappropriate.
No.
Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you. Welcome back. Joey, I want to start with you. Doug Woodward, one of your, of course, senior economist at USC and one of your colleagues, said at the economic forecast at the Darla Moore School of Business right before the holidays, he said, this is about as good as it gets when it comes to the economy. It sounds good, but Joey, does that mean that we can only go down from here? And I'm not being provocative. What does that mean?
Well, it means that if we look at most major metrics, they're all performing relatively well. So if we look at industries across the board, most are growing at fairly stable rates. And if we look at the very basics of what we call the real economy, so job growth, income growth, and price levels, so what consumers are paying at the grocery store, all of those are moving in a positive direction, except for price levels, which are remaining stable. Mm-hmm. So if we look at the underlying fundamentals, things look pretty good. And I would say if we can extend the level of activity we've seen over the last few years over the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years, that would be a good forecast.
In the triangle in Orange County, the center of the universe as far as Carrboro and Chapel Hill are concerned,
yeah.
Is it as good as it gets?
It feels pretty good. The triangle is an extraordinary place, right? People are moving from all over the country and all over the world. Our international in-migration is substantial, so also domestically, and it's because there's great jobs, great work opportunity, and the cost of housing, though high, is lower than many of the other metros around the country. So,
is it prohibitive, Aaron? Do you hear the stories of good times and bad times? It's a great economy, but it pushes people out of homes that they've been in, or pushes it out of reach.
Affordable housing, workforce housing, is one of the greatest challenges. It's the mayor of Raleigh's top priority. It's a key priority in Orange County. It is really hard, and it inflates wages when you have to pay someone to drive 40 minutes. We have to keep paying them more and more in order to get them to do the in-commute. So we'll be better as a community if we can build more accessible workforce housing.
One of the attributes of a good economy, we were talking right before the program, Joey, was the idea that it has been either underreported or misreported by the broad media that the wage growth for the lowest income workers has been, according to the New York Times right before Christmas, low income workers wage growth may be growing at their highest rate in decades.
Yes.
That You don't hear that in the media.
No, you really don't. And I think there's a specific reason for that, and it's that we have seen very stagnant wage growth during the early part of this expansion. So we're in the 11th year now, going back to the summer of 2009. And really up until about 2014, 2015, we weren't seeing any appreciable wage growth. And that's basically just supply and demand. There was so much slack in the labor force because we'd seen so many layoffs during the Great Recession that it took a while for the labor market to tighten up and get to the point that employers were beginning to raise wages. But yes, in the last year, workers who are on typically the lower end of the pay scale, occupations that are on the lower end of the pay scale, have been seeing the most wage growth. And that's a very positive sign and fairly unique because we're in a uniquely long expansion at this point.
Does that square with what you see, Aaron, the idea that those lower income actually are seeing the wage growth? So
we are seeing that as well. Children in poverty is on the decline and it has returned to pre-recession levels. We're seeing actually housing affordability is improving as wages are going up and some of our housing prices in some of the lower end market product is not increasing. But we're seeing exactly that. Folks are starting to make better wages and it's really improving how they can take care of their family.
So how does that, and I'm sorry to interrupt you both, but how does that compare and contrast the dialogue, and it turns into a political dialogue, about minimum wage hike? California takes it to 15 or 20 or wherever the West Coast will go, or some of the progressive leaders in that. And then North Carolina and South Carolina debate about, well, it needs to be 15 at minimum per hour.
So here's what, I think it becomes easier to talk about raising the minimum wage when nobody's making minimum wage. So when it is not many people in the market making minimum wage anymore, and so there's no employers who will, the employer objection declines as they're all paying their people more than that anyway. What's left is just political views about whether or not the state or the feds ought to have a higher minimum wage.
So does it mean as much?
It may not. Depends on what they raise it to. If they raised it to 15, that would be very meaningful. If they raised it to 10, I don't think it would have as much impact.
And it's very different depending on the state as well. So if you look at South Carolina or North Carolina versus states where California, Washington, and so forth, where they have higher minimum wages already, when you're looking at that marginal difference, when you're looking at a national standard, that makes it makes a major difference as to whether we're looking at a significant increase in a state like South Carolina or less so on the West Coast.
Aaron, in North Carolina, the General Assembly is this close to going back into session. But when they go back into session, they're going to be this close to coming out of session. It could be a day or two. North Carolina has not agreed on a budget.
Right.
There are bills, there are issues around education and transportation. What is this? And I hate to even call it a short session. It's almost a flyby session.
It's maddening. I mean, as an observer externally, it's maddening. We expect our elected officials to work together, even if they have policy differences, to deliver us a budget. It's their key responsibility. And the fact that we can't get our House and Senate and our governor to agree on one, or maybe even to talk about one, is pretty frustrating for state employees, for teachers, and then for communities that rely on decisions made by our government. So,
is that frustration, is that a political frustration?
Mine is a political frustration. I'd be as frustrated if the D's and not the R's were in charge. I have high expectations of our government to deliver on the key responsibilities, and right now they're not doing it.
Joey, in South Carolina, there's been a lot of talk in recent years, and 2020 might be the year around tax reform. Do you think that's going to happen in the General Assembly and the State House?
It's hard to speculate on that. I'd say that tax reform is always something that's is a high priority, something that South Carolina is looking to maintain competitiveness. South Carolina has been very competitive in this expansion. We've seen higher rates of growth than the national average. So I would say it's probably more likely now because we're looking ahead to the next decade, trying to maintain ways to maintain the advantages that we've seen, the growth patterns that we've seen. But that's really a kind of a wait and see approach in terms of being more specific than that.
So in the balance of, we start a new decade, and we'll bring our guest on here in a moment and give us all a chance to dialogue. We start a new decade. It's 2020. It's an election year. It's an important year for North Carolina because the RNC is going to be in Charlotte, and that even focuses political pressure on the old North State. So, Aaron, in the last minute or so, we'll start with you and then end with you, Joey. The idea that will 2020 continue to be an expansionary, progressive with a small p, good economy in North Carolina?
I believe so. I believe that all the indicators say so. So we're in a good spot. Let's address a few other. Let's work on healthcare, let's work on infrastructure, and let's work on improving our connection between workers and work opportunity.
Joey, what do you think?
I agree with that. I think 2020 is going to be a good year. The concerns about a recession have faded. Most of the economic metrics look good for 2020. I think slower growth is a reality that we're going to be facing. The labor force shortage is going to be a bottleneck on growth. But when we look back, we'll compare 2019 to 2020 and say 2020 was a good year, but maybe not quite as good as 2019.
Do election years tend to be positive in economic growth?
Well, they matter. They tend to increase economic uncertainty on the margin because as we get closer and we see some of the policy differences begin to become obvious in terms of what that's going to look like in November, you typically see a bit more uncertainty because businesses don't like uncertainty. They're looking to make decisions. So that can negatively affect economic activity on the margin, but it's not significant. Okay. So I don't anticipate a significant or a meaningful difference just because it's an election year.
Gentlemen, thank you. Let's bring our guest on. Before we do that, next couple of weeks on our program should be interesting dialogues as well, and we hope you will join us for that. A guy named Todd Olson from Pendo up in the Triangle of North Carolina has got a head of steam and some momentum going around what that tech company has been doing and hiring. The CEO and co-founder of Pendo will be our guest on on this program. Also, coming back on the dialogue, Lou Kennedy from Neffen Pharmaceuticals. Talk about progressive, exciting, good energy. CEO Lou Kennedy from Neffen Pharmaceuticals, never shortage of things to say or do, and she will be here once again. Being able to rethink employment, the labor force, growing industries with an innovative vision, these are priorities for our guest today. He was appointed Executive Director of the South Carolina Department of Employment and Workforce. It's called DEW. By Governor Henry McMaster in May of last year. A widely respected and known employment labor attorney, he now leads this agency in a period of record employment. We welcome now Dan Ellzey. Mr. Director, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So, Mr. Director, what is the single largest looming workforce issue for you as you see it?
Well, we've got a number of issues, and they are totally different. One is we've got a booming economy. We set a record every month with the number of jobs that we have. At the same time, we've got about almost 70,000 jobs posted and unfilled. North Carolina's in the same situation. You got unemployment at a record low, 2.4%, about 58,000 unemployed people, about 69,000 unfilled jobs, and they remain unfilled despite all kinds of efforts to do something about it. So we're looking at a number of things, and before I go into specifics, I'll go back to the second issue. It's our rural areas, and my guess is North Carolina's facing the same thing. We've got rural areas that are not doing half as well as the urban areas. Unemployment, double what it is in the urban areas, and at the same time, we got jobs there. Not a lot, but we got jobs that are open and can't fill, even though we've got employees who are unemployed, going through the federal training programs, still having difficulty filling the positions. So in South Carolina, we're doing a number of things. In terms of the 69,000 open jobs, we've looked at it. We've looked at where all of our employees come from, high schools, colleges, apprenticeships, from the unemployed, from coming out of prison or wherever they're coming from, and we know that will not meet the demands. We also know, as the economists will tell us, that we've got people called sideliners. People, adults who are not incarcerated, who are capable of working, but are not working and not looking for work. In our state, it's over 1.6 million, 1,635,000.
Really?
Yes, in North Carolina, it's far higher than that. So we've looked at it, and we know that a lot of these people have got the skills we need to fill the jobs. We know that we've just got to come up with something to attract them back into the workplace. Lou Kennedy, who you just mentioned, that runs a very fine pharmaceutical company in Columbia, was truly innovative. When she came up, they came up with a new product that was going to need about 600 employees for a 2-year period before it would be automated. Had no idea where they were going to find them. Well, they went to school teachers. Started a campaign to bring in school teachers, cut off applications at 650, and they are now allowing them to work flexible second shifts after school. So real innovative. The day we heard about that, we called, we got a meeting set up with Lou, went out and learned exactly how they did it. And our question is, can we take what she did with school teachers in a pharmaceutical plant, which is different. It's clean, it's light, it's airy, it's brand new. will it apply in a regular manufacturing plant? So we got a pilot program going in Spartanburg right now where we are recruiting people from different areas. They've got jobs. I wouldn't call them underemployed because they're making good money like teachers are, less than, of course, most people think they deserve, but and they're doing it on a different shift schedule. They've set up a mini shift which runs from 7 to 11 and are recruiting people like policemen, firemen, teachers, people who work different schedules. So that's where we are, and it's going to take more look into the sideliners. We put out a proposal to try to have economists come in and study it and tell us how to, we know where they are, we know how many we got by county, we don't know what skills they've got. And because we don't know who's got particular skills, we don't know how to go about trying to attract them. Yeah. But we do know it's something. And right now, the two things we're finding is money, $21 an hour, part-time, no benefits. It gets their attention. We do know that, and that's working well where we're trying it. And flexible shift times. If you can accommodate it like Lou does at her company, Nephron, then it's a wonderful source of new people.
Joey, question?
So we've talked a lot about manufacturing, but if we look across the board, are there other hidden gems that the agency is engaged in now that businesses can really take advantage of, either in terms of programs or resources that if a business is looking for workers, what else is Due offering right now that can help those businesses in 2020?
Well, we're working hard with all kind of businesses. I mean, our goal is not have a manufacturer or a hospital or anybody else throw up their hands and say we can't get employees in the state of South Carolina. The problem is figuring out where the employees are going to come from and getting them there with the specific skills. One thing that we think has incredible potential is the apprenticeship program. Now, South Carolina is very strong in our adult apprenticeship program, recognized nationally for doing a wonderful job that South Carolina Tech colleges run it. Where we don't do a lot is in the youth apprenticeship, the high school. We only have 300 people, a little over 300 who participate in it. We know that can be a great source of more skilled employees for employers, and we think it is one of our solutions for the rural areas, which have got an awful lot more to fight than someone does in Greenville, Charleston, or Columbia. So we are looking at a number of things. We're running specific job fairs aimed at smaller employers. We're running job fairs aimed at specific industries, so you got all the same industry there, so an employee who's interested in working in a certain area will go in and we'll see a related number of industries, but it's not just a hodgepodge, which brings in people where only 10% of the employers that they are interested in. So we're definitely trying to do things different. We're trying to figure out how to get more people into the workforce. Of course, that affects the labor participation rate. You get them looking, they're counted. You get them a job, they're also counted, but counted better in the form.
Eric?
I love your idea of the targeted job fair. It's sometimes frustrating for the small business to be there, and those aren't the workers they're looking for. If you were to advise a small business owner who's looking for a worker or two, what's the best way for them to interact with your organization?
Well, that's a great question, because the biggest irony in what I do is if you look at the biggest, most sophisticated companies in South Carolina, take a Michelin, they use us extensively. From taking applications, advertising for it, screening, getting the employees out there, making recommendations, then they make the hiring decision. You go to a small employer, an HVAC company with 20 employees, they don't know we exist in some cases.
Can you serve the small one just like you serve Michelin?
We can. And as a matter of fact, we have launched a small employer outreach where we are dedicating a certain number of our staff to focus on employers with 50 and fewer employees. And keep in mind, that's a huge segment in South Carolina and North Carolina as well. That's a huge segment. But we're going to systematically, by county, approach starting with those who've got 50 and moving our way down. While we're focusing on the small, we get more bang for our buck an hour when we go to someone with 50 employees than 5, and introducing them to what we can do, how they can do it on the computer, how we can help them, how we can assign a business consultant to them who will be their contact, and they won't have to worry about who to call or who's calling them, or even worse, having 3 people from our agency or different agencies calling on the same.
Director Ellzey, I want to come back to something. You said there 1.6 million sideliners, as you call them.
Right.
In the total population of South Carolina, that's quite a bit of people, isn't it?
Oh yeah, yeah.
I mean, is that the largest it's ever been? I mean, that seems like if you could get half of them or a quarter of them, that would be going a long way to meeting the needs of what South Carolina talks about, a workforce shortage.
Mm-hmm. So if you could get 10,000, which is a very small number, but if you could get 10,000 to come off the sidelines and take a job among these almost 70,000 posted positions we've got, and if we assume the total package of wages and benefits is, say, 50,000, and do the math times 10,000, I mean, that's a huge impact on the economy in and of itself. It would have a phenomenal impact on the employers to fill those positions, and now you got 10,000 more people working in the state. So it's a big number. I mean, that's the number you wind up when you do a labor participation rate calculation. I mean, those are the people out there who aren't working. The ones you're dividing are the ones who are working who are looking. It's everybody else that's not in the in the thing.
Joey?
What about the long run? Thinking a little bit more about the next recession, which may be hopefully is several years away.
Right.
But with the unemployment rate so low for so long, how are you all preparing for that inevitability whenever it comes?
Yeah. Well, so we look at this from two standpoints. Number one, how we operate. And we have an economic task force which has studied the situation, and we have a game plan for what we're going to do if unemployment starts rising quickly. So from a procedural, logistical standpoint, we know what we as an agency will do to make sure we've got the people in the places they need to be to go out and service all the employees and employers who are going to be having problems at that time. The other thing we look at is, you know, we have another recession in 5 years. What are the jobs going to look like when those people come back? Because everything you're reading now is talking about how quickly jobs are going to change. And they're all recommending that we start preparing, training people for those skills. Well, the problem with that is, other than our predictions as to how many people are going to be in certain, and we do those, certain professions like IT or manufacturing or education or health care or whatever, other than doing that, when they say that artificial intelligence and robotics are going to eliminate all these positions, what are we going to be left with, or what new jobs are going to be created? So it's really difficult to say we're going to go out today and start training people to operate a certain piece of equipment when we don't know that piece of equipment is going to even be there, or whether there's going to be a new piece of equipment. I was in a plant in Fairfax, South Carolina earlier this week. They make commercial ice machines. Fairfax is a very rural area, hard hit by the recession, still hard hit, high unemployment. They put in a phenomenally expensive piece of equipment which eliminated 25% of their manufacturing employees. A huge number. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about why they did it, and did they do it because it made money? And they said no, they did it because they couldn't find employees. So we're working very hard in the rural areas. Matter of fact, we're working with that company. They are one of our pilot programs in a rural area where we're doing training totally different than the federal model. We're not using federal money, so we're not restricted in what we do for this pilot program.
What percentage of the budget is our federal pass-through dollars?
Our budget?
Yes.
99%.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you got to when you say you don't use federal dollars, it's a much smaller budgetary issue that you can work with.
Well, it is. We also have some federal money that comes in that gives us a lot more leeway than the federal training program money does. So we've got some money to do pilots and this sort of thing. And so what we're doing in the rural areas is we're looking at all the problems that you've got in a rural area. Number one, do you have employers? So we find an employer in Fairfax, Scotsman Ice Machines, one of the best employers in the area, highest paying jobs, good employers, good benefits, can't get employees. So number one, we got what we need. So often we do training where there are no jobs. The federal law says you train where they are and then try to get them transportation. Well, if transportation doesn't work out, you trained them, they got the credential, but no job. So here, the number one thing is jobs. So we're training for them. We are only training people who they are going to hire. In other words, if your criminal record or your educational background or your work record is not going to meet their requirements, we don't put you in that training program. We will put you in our other federal programs. You're not denied anything, but you're not going into this training program. We're giving a priority to people who live within walking distance of the plant.
Nice.
A second priority, if you're within 5 miles, a bicycle ride, because we know the huge problem of transportation.
That's going to have to be the last word. I wish we had time, but that's it. It's a half an hour. And Director Ellzey, thank you, because clearly you bring a great depth of knowledge and energy to the jobs, and thank you for being on the program. Best of luck going forward. Please come back.
Thank you. Would love to do so. We'll let you know how these pilot programs turn out.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Truly. Good to see you, Aaron. Thanks
Good
for
to
being on
see
the
you.
program.
Thank you.
Mr. Nessen, Dr. Nessen.
Thank
Good
you,
to have you on
Chris.
the program. Until next week, I'm Chris Woody. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review provided by High Point University, Martin Marietta, Colonial Life, the Duke Endowment, Barings, Grant Thornton, Sunoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.